Hi, brothers and sisters, and welcome to another Temple 420 Sabbath Sesh. I think we're at number 21 now. Though I think I put that last week too. I don't know. We're in our 20s. I'm here with Greg X, and I'll start out here today with a prayer with it too. Thank you for all those who come and watch and hang out with us during Seth. Sesh, may you be blessed and seek out the Almighty Living God who's given us the Word and led us through our lives. And hopefully, we can bring inspiration to you and bring some good wisdom and discussion for your entertainment and enjoyment.
Amen. I'm glad my phone's been working the whole time.
It's been looking good and clear this time.
Oh, good.
That's a good looking rooster, too.
Yeah, the rooster is a handsome guy. I'm really interested in these two birds in the tree right now. We call them the TikTok birds because they have long TikTok tails, kind of like what are those Palo de Monte peacocks, but like only one long peacock feather.
Yeah.
Yeah, can,
No.
I don't think you can see it because the camera doesn't zoom in too close. But there's two of them in this tree right up here. Just kind of kicking back, enjoying. All right. Well, what have you been reading in the Bible recently?
Mostly this week I did the Wednesday reading and went through the plagues up to Passover.
Oh, you were in Exodus.
Yeah. So in the beginning of Exodus is where we're at in that currently.
And how's that going so far? What's your most interesting redevelopment? I know you know the story from before, but from the reread, has anything popped out to you?
I think the most interesting thing was that I kind of saw it whenever the way as the movies where it was seemed like Moses came and visited every day, and then it was kind of a routine setup there, but it seemed more varied and different than that way that it did in the movies.
We've talked about this before, how the movies colors our view of reality. So you're saying that in the movies, it made it seem like, hey, just walked into Pharaoh and they talked every day. And in the Bible, it seemed, how would you describe it more?
I think in the movie it kind of seemed like he came into his court every day and kind of showed him off the examples. But when I read the Bible with it, it sounded like God told him to like meet him by the Nile when he went out to the river. So it would be like a daily occurrence that Moses would come by and talk to the Pharaoh about it. It seemed like it was a more personal, less glamorous way than the movies portrayed with it.
Ah,
Like it
okay.
was kind of more of a casual thing that Moses was just well known and good with the Pharaoh, so he could wander up to him, and when he was just going out to the river to do his daily morning thing, rather
Right.
than coming and presenting himself before all those. And it kind of sounded like with that one too that when they were in the movie, they had the musicians there with them and said, "Hey, look, my musicians can do it just as well." The only time it seemed when I read that was when they made the staffs into snakes and Aaron's staff ate them all up. Otherwise, it seemed like he was like, "Yeah, those are things that happen like the frogs, but our magicians can get the frogs to happen." And then it was what was it? I think it was the fleas that Moses ends up changing through the power of God, making the fleas come out of the dust of Egypt and do afflictions on them. And the wise men there, like he's got some power of a god, the god. Like we need to do something about that. And then or the Pharaoh continues to have his heart hardened and resist still through that, even though the wise men are like, hey, that's not very smart. He's doing things that are way beyond to prove that that's the Elohim.
And what's interesting too is that the Bible really emphasized that God hardened his heart, and I don't think that's really portrayed much in the movie.
Right. And I don't think that I really understood that as much, but I think it makes more sense when looking at it. And I brought up the various gods that was challenging to that. I knew that one for a long time, but it seemed like it was hardening his heart so that those examples would be going to all the Egyptians to say, hey, there was the 3 days of night. So obviously, Ra wasn't able to take care of that. And
Right.
the storms they had, so Seth and the other god was not able to take care of that. So really going through a time to show each one of your gods is useless, and we're going to trial them all, putting them on trial.
Right. I think that's an interesting aspect of it as well. Um, I do think it is unique though that because Moses had grown up as an Egyptian, probably knew the Pharaoh personally, um, that he was allowed to somehow communicate with him, um, almost in like a humiliating, begging way. It's almost like the Pharaoh wanted to hear from him. You know, like, look, you could have been this Pharaoh that I am, but now it's me. And I think that's one aspect that the movie part did kind of get right, that there was a rivalry between the two men. And, you know, Moses is 80 years old. It's not like they feared him. And it's someone you've known since childhood, I guess, or until he was 40. He was 40 years old when he fled. Is that what the book says?
I think it was, yeah.
Yeah, because I think he grew up in Egypt until 40, then fled for 40 years, then wandered in the desert for 40 years with the people. Um, so it's a very interesting life, an interesting story, and Moses is one of the most revered people in many cultures. It's where we get our modern version of the law right
Right.
now. And I think the Ten Commandments are over the Supreme Court.
Right. We've got them definitely printed on the walls down here in our downtown. You'll see that. Moses and the Ten Commandments around the side of the building etched into the walls, which is wild.
Right, because he's a pillar of culture, of
Yeah.
Western civilization, and they haven't torn him down yet. And he's also uh, part of that. Abraham and Moses are considered in a lot of different cultures, not just Christian and Jewish.
Right. Yeah. That's one of the things that I found wild with my exploring kind of just different spiritual things, wondering how that all goes together, or why people believe things like that. It all seems like God does intertwine and cross through those and have people who represent a cross. Like Jesus is known through a bunch of the religions too. They just their respect to him is different. They don't give him that reverence. Definitely don't put him as the
But
son of God like we do in Christianity.
they all acknowledge him in some way. Yeah, like
Yeah,
there's no equivalent in Christianity saying, "Oh, we had the Buddha come here,"
right.
or Shiva was also in the Bible. They never claim that, but they all want to claim Jesus' incarnation came to us too.
I've even seen some of the Buddhists say he was the greatest Buddha. I'm like, then why do you guys follow the other Buddha? Like, I
Right.
don't understand. Like, if he's the greatest one, aren't you guys supposed to figure that out and figure out why he is and all that? Wow.
It is interesting, huh?
And it was interesting too that Moses must have some kind of good charisma and thing that people liked him, even though he didn't like his speech that he was giving God, because he was always respected, even though he was a Hebrew. And after the 40 years when he left and became like a sheep herder and stuff, it said those people were not respected. They didn't like herders and
There
stuff.
we go.
and they were didn't seem like they were racist to them with that, or whatever you would say with the Jew and Egyptian animosity, because they said herders and people that did cattle and stuff were not respected, and that's one of the reasons they didn't like the Jews
Well, and that was more,
and the
that's not
Hebrews.
necessarily racist, but more culture. Like if you're a city person and these people are shepherds, sure, you may buy meat from them and love lamb chops, but you don't necessarily want to hang out in their stinking barns and out here. And when I first moved to the Yucatan Peninsula years and years ago, they were very prejudiced against the Mayans. So that was like 89, 90, 91. And there was like, they wouldn't even allow some of them into the store. And they're like, oh, they stink. They're from the Pueblos or whatever. And it seemed very racist to me. And oh, there goes that bird right over the towel bird. Um, but some of it was true. You know, all some stereotypes were based in it. They were like worried they were going to steal or they stinked. But when you live out in these pueblos and there was no electricity, all running water is by gravity, and it's a little more scarce. The people do have a distinct kind of smell out here. Not so much anymore because there is now more running water, electricity, things like that. But 30 years ago, 40 years ago, they just lived in cabañas with no air conditioning, no real fan. They cooked in smoky stuff inside their cabaña. Um, so there was cultural differences that led to like the same reason the Egyptians and the Hebrews would have animosity and distrust and dislike of each other, especially the city people like the Egyptians, where you'd have perfume, sewer stuff, sidewalks, probably hot running water, nice warm shower or bath, potentiality. Then you see a bunch of people living in tents, hanging out with sheep and goats, fighting bears and lions, like David the shepherd. And it's just a different class of people. What are you going to talk about?
Well, I know through when the story of Joseph and all that too, they were talking about how they were not so good with Hebrews at that point. Like, hey, they're hurting animals and doing all of that too, but that does make a lot of sense with that, especially here in the houses. I wonder what the Egyptians would have been doing though too. What kind of jobs are they doing in that age?
Think of like Beverly Hills, wherever the epicenter of culture and economy of the world would be. You're building megalithic statues, giant hallways. Uh, Probably some of that would be for commerce. You're getting products from all over the world and selling them in your markets. You're talking about top dollar stuff. So, whatever people were doing, international trade, uh, shipping, the Egyptians were master builders. They're probably, we have pyramids all around the world. Maybe some Egyptians were brought over to some of these other places to help them build their pyramids, or
Just some of the wildest stuff. I've seen some of those crazy short videos on there too. They're like, America's the real Egypt because we've got several pyramid structures that nobody ever points out.
and,
And
and here's the thing: we have Paleolithic Hebrew. If you Google Las Lunas Rocks, a place I've been to, there's the Ten Commandments written in like 2000 BC, scroll 1800 BC, sometime after Moses, and there was a Hebrew alphabet, but they have it in the Paleo Hebrew alphabet in the U.S., written the Ten Commandments. Our God who got us out of Egypt, and it's right there. Gave us these commandments. Um, so it's not a stretch to think that both the Hebrews and the Egyptians and others came to the Western Hemisphere And I don't know how that knowledge disappeared or wasn't recorded. Was it intentional? So we think, oh, well, the Europeans came in 1492 and they were the only ones who came because no one else mattered but the people writing the history books. And they didn't know, or they did know, and they had maps from earlier cultures, but they couldn't confirm it because they hadn't been across the ocean. Um, and they certainly hadn't set up trading colonies, which was the original goal when we started America. These guys were supposed to come to America, grow things that couldn't be grown there, and ship them back. And it was investments by business people into these colonies, economic colonies, that spurred the growth into the what we call the U.S., North America.
Maybe some of that stuff though was also pre-flood too, because I've heard the idea that possibly it was Pangea until the flood, and then everything busted up then and went to what we know now,
Uh,
because they fit pretty good together and there's stuff across all of them.
well, it does look like it fits together pretty well. There is land in the middle, uh, so I just I don't know whether it's millions of years of tectonic movement, or a flood situation. I prefer to believe the biblical description over the macro evolutionary uh, version. But, you know, I don't think that's the important thing for my particular faith in either science or the Bible. Um, I mean, maybe it is. Maybe I'm being a little too
I could,
naive there.
to me, it goes the same as space stuff. Like if we can go to space and the shape of the Earth and how that foundation goes,
But we
really
can't go above 350
relation.
miles above Earth, and that's like barely out of space.
Right.
350 miles is nothing.
And there's a radiation belt beyond that that'll fry you too, in between there and the moon. That's where, like, what do you guys?
Supposedly, yeah, there's the Van Allen radiation belt. I don't know. I just feel like a lot of that we're being lied to steal our tax money, just like this Doge is finding out they're stealing tax money with anything they can. You look at who was running NASA at the beginning, Aleister Crowley, L. Ron Hubbard, Walt Disney. These people made money off the Werner von Braun, a Nazi. You know, I just think they were stealing tax money, and that's what it's been always about for a long time now.
True. And when you say that, that makes think of where we kind of go with the basis of that too. They also lie about the main one with our food and our herbs and our things that we have like that. God created those for our use, and they continue to say they're dangerous, not if used properly, which they can see in the science, but they're always like, hey, they're useless or they're poison.
No,
They've totally
marijuana's
altered the way health goes.
marijuana under the Controlled Substance Act is still Schedule One, more dangerous than heroin and cocaine, according to the government.
Absolutely.
Um, so this uh, absurd, we're here to protect the people and mislabel a medicine as a drug and drugs as medicine. Um, it's like the book of Revelation says, at the end times people will call good evil and evil good, and they'll seek to use pharmakia to I forget what the word is, but I remember they were going to destroy people or confuse people with pharmakia, and it seems like they've done that with the vaccine for COVID, which gave a lot of people heart damage and killed many more. Lying about marijuana, which is a healing medicine, and saying how evil it is. Uh, so
All of them. To me, any of those others like Xanax and Vicodin were some of the biggest ones. We could give you Vicodin and it doesn't stop the pain. It just makes you feel dumb and you don't sensate the pain is the same as like the Xanax. They don't really get rid of your anxiety. They make your brain in a wonky state that you don't feel those same things. You don't really work and solve to fix
Uh,
that.
I've seen people taking Xanax for recreational purposes, just being like crazed.
Oh yeah.
So it can
Makes you
be, those are real drugs. You know, I've never seen anyone smoke a joint and be as crazy as I have seen them on Xanax.
and they don't lead you to a solution. It sounds like by the science and everything I've seen with cannabis, cannabis helps your endocannabinoid system, helps your body restore and helps your body work more functionally.
Right. And think about this. What happens if it's a fake pill and there's fentanyl in it or something and you die?
Right.
Where it's hard to fake a marijuana plant. It's already so cheap to grow. Uh, it's almost more costly. When it was $5,000 a pound, people were spraying it and making it look like that. But right now, cannabis, you can get THCA legally anywhere, and that basically is marijuana. Do you know what THCA is?
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
Exactly the same thing.
Yeah.
It's so wild and crazy.
It is. It is. Excuse me. I've been up since 4 this morning and I haven't eaten yet. What time? And it's 10. 6 hours. That's not too bad.
Yeah.
I've gotten a lot done too.
There's a story that I get from like Alan and stuff that he claims that there's knowledge in there with cannabis and the POTUS and his administration that they know better about it. And that's why in the 2020 Farm Bill, they technically legalized it. And he says they're working on getting some more things with that. That he spoke with the pastor that works directly with Trump, and they've got more they know about. And
I
they will
pray
become,
I pray that's true. I don't have any necessarily inside information, but I've heard from my friend who knows Roger Stone that Mr. Trump, Donald Trump, President Trump is very open to cannabis's economic potential and understands that it's been suppressed. Um, but I think I don't think he wants to come out and say certain things because everyone attacks whatever he says. He can say, I have the cure for cancer. And they'll be like, oh, it's Donald Trump's cure for cancer. I'm not taking that one. So,
he doesn't even have to do anything. They're all freaking out about supposedly they think he gave plans to fight China to Elon Musk, and Elon Musk is telling China, and he's like, I didn't say anything or do anything about that. So they've always
right.
got terrible stuff.
Yeah, no, we live in a very politicized world right now. Um, so,
What you got down there?
some fish floating around, some mushrooms growing on some wood, some water lettuce growing on top of the water.
What I was wondering.
And these are sweet potato leaves, which can be cooked like spinach. Very tender greens. If you're out of salad, you can throw a couple on a sandwich. Give it a little, little bite.
Did you guys get so that you're gonna grow any cannabis out that way? Yeah.
No, you have to get an amparo and ask
Cool.
permission, but you can get permission. Costs like $250. So I have not invested in an amparo and haven't grown too much cannabis.
How does that work down there? Does it get crazy?
I have no idea.
No, I
Uh,
know here they say, hey, put it in a locked room and make sure nobody looks at it, and we can
oh,
come back at any time we want to. And I'm like, what? That's
believe
so
me,
crazy.
if I tried to grow any, the chickens would eat it anyway.
Is
But
their favorite food?
what's that?
say that it is the animal's favorite food. They say deers and chickens
Oh,
and raccoons, they love to eat cannabis. So
yeah, I've seen a couple come up. If somebody's throwing a seed around here or there, they pop up like a weed. But the chickens eat them. Um, yeah, I'd like to grow some cannabis because it is what brought me to God in some ways. Really thinking about seasons and planting and um, how nature just takes a little seed and can make more, but the seed has to die. There's so many parallels to, I guess that's why, if you live in an agricultural community, which at the time of Jesus, even though there were still people that raised sheep and shepherds, they were a city dwelling people, um, with uh, agricultural, growing barley, growing flax, growing grapes, so it was an agricultural based economy more than shepherding at that point. Um, it's
that would make a lot
interesting.
of sense.
Yeah, that's interesting how times change, and the story will change depending on where you're at. Oh, big fish just swam by.
And that makes a
Um,
lot of sense on the Egyptian side too. I'm guessing a lot of them were probably processing grain as jobs and moving grain and stuff. And like, why do you watch animals walk out in the field and poop everywhere and clean up their poop and do all that when you can just be making bread and eating bread and
well,
making
they
stuff
they they didn't
barley?
clean up. They didn't clean up their poop. People, the shepherds, like in those days, would hike around and move their flocks up in the mountains where springs would come from. And they would make one area still green. And so they'd move from place to place, finding those green pastures, um, with meandering rivers and waterfalls and things like that, so that they could feed their flocks. Because you didn't have a grain store to buy grain, and I don't think they were necessarily growing grain for feed. Um,
Well, when in the Egyptian times, when you lived in that town of Gishon or whatever that was close to Egypt, though, wouldn't you kind of have a
mhm.
farm that you got to manage in that point?
Maybe they were still shepherds at that point. And a common plant to grow would be chickpeas, maybe cucumbers. But I didn't understand your point, saying that they had farms.
Yeah, because I know they were talking just in the Egyptian time. I thought it was Gishon or so, the place that they lived in Egypt, that the
Goshen,
Hebrews actually,
Goshen.
yeah, Goshen, that they have their houses and kind of farm areas and stuff there. So I would expect them to be less nomadic and have to clean
First,
through stuff and milk cows and do all that stuff that the Egyptians would be like, why are you getting all over those animals and messing with animal stuff and all that?
well, for sure, that may have been a transition time to more stability, maybe more or less room to move around your flocks. I don't know the landscape of Goshen. Um, but I know it was rich land so that they could grow crops there and probably could raise a lot of animals there. That during the time of the plagues, their land was somehow protected from the plagues. Um,
And surprisingly, the light, that was one of the biggest ones that I saw that was wildest. That it gets dark on Egypt, but in the land of Goshen stays bright.
mm,
The Hebrews don't have any problem.
interesting, huh?
Yeah.
Yeah, you,
And for
you
3
wonder, is
days.
that
So that almost sounds like that would almost have to be something flat based too. Because how's something going to stay there 3 days?
I don't know. I don't
Super
know.
supernatural.
Yeah. Hey, I think I need to go eat some food now. I'm getting a little hungry.
Yeah, sounds good.
You want to say thanks and say a prayer to end the session?
That sounds good.
And
Thanks for
I can I just say thanks? It was nice having a conversation with you before and during the show.
absolutely.
All right. Thanks.
Thank you all who came to attend and hear our discussions here. Thank you for the blessings that you give us and the people who are seeking you out. May they pursue things that are in your name and the goodness that you bring to know your Son. In Christ's name, amen.
Amen.
Well,
Peace.
that's
All right.
ending
Thank you.
breakfast.
Perfect.
Joy.
All right. Thank you, man. I'll talk to you soon.
God bless.
Bye.